Let me switch over to the layout editor here. Yes, save changes. And good morning. And good morning to all of you. And I hope you're having an amazing day. And if it's not the best Tuesday of your life, I'm going to do the best job I can to make it the best Tuesday of your life. So I don't know if I'll be successful, if I'll fail, but I'm sure you'll all tell me in the comments or send me some DMs. Good morning, Jesse. And good morning, Lisa. Happy Tuesday. And Jesse, I hope Rocky is there. Send Rocky some love for me as well. Welcome to the Freedom Coffee live stream where we celebrate the freedoms that we have and some of them that we've fought for, particularly in Canada. And we look to expanding those freedoms in the future. And you know how do we do that? The first thing we do is we talk about truth and not total fabricated narrative BS. And I got to tell you, some of the things I've learned while I've been here in Florida with people who are kind of plugged into the political apparatus, it's really, really quite concerning what goes on all sides of the political spectrum. So that's one thing. And the other thing that we do is we get our coffee, our positivity coffee. And every time we take a sip, it's a little bit more positivity into our veins. And in my case, as you know, I'm down here, so it's Dunkin' Donuts down the street. And so if you're in Delray in Dunkin' Donuts, you may see me from time to time. And good morning to you all. Bridget, what's up? Bridget was just here in Florida yesterday, and we missed each other. She didn't quite come down as far south, but you were just north of Port St. Lucie, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Bridget. But she's on her way back to Canada, so wish Bridget a safe trip home, and we'll talk to you when I'm back in Canada. Rocky is hormonal. What do you mean hormonal? What? Rocky's a bird. Rocky's going through menopause? Was he got hot flashes? I understand. And biting, so he's opted to stay in his cage. Okay, all right, well. Rocky wants to be that way. Rocky is. Anyways, so first, please like, share, subscribe, and congratulations to me. Finally monetized on YouTube. We'll see how long that lasts. I don't think that's going to last very long, which is why you can always follow me on Locals. And when you post your comments on Locals here, which is the iPad beside me, I encourage you. You can post as many memes as you want in there as possible. Please join, and a bunch of things are happening. But please like, share, and subscribe. That also includes the Substack, of which I will have another Substack in the next day or so. I'm just working on it now. It's depending. I'm waiting for something to be released to incorporate that in the article as well. So hopefully, I guess either while I'm flying back or when I get back to Canada, I'll have it released. So it is what it is. We're going to talk about a little bit about positivity and positive framing and dealing with some of the anxiety that lots of people are dealing with. I'm going to get to that in the future. But we're going to start with, I'm trying to think of a safe word for YouTube. I guess we're going to start with an execution. That's right, because bots don't understand context. So an execution that occurred in Philadelphia. And I think what we can do, not that we celebrate the execution, because even to people we dislike politically, we don't want to see anybody harmed, and especially, executed. But I think what we can celebrate is the death of wokeness. This is just another step in this process. So there was a Soros, they call him a blogger, but really he's just an activist, a mouthpiece for the establishment on that side. His name was Josh Kruger. He worked for, I don't know, anti-gun, Ukraine flag, pride flag, all that sort of stuff. And I think he's kind of not the real pride flag, but the new, the black flag of racial pride, which is what I call that new, the thing with the racist chevrons on it. So he's one of those guys, anti-gun, blah, 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 guns killing people, all that sort of nonsense. And longtime Soros funded, very entrenched in Philadelphia I don't want to say politics, but smearmerchery and smearing anybody who's like all communists, right? What do? They just smear people, right? So unfortunately, people don't take anything seriously until it affects them. And that happens on both sides. It's not unique to just kind of liberal politics, although we see a lot of it. And so Joshua, maybe, was in his home yesterday, and this is the anti-gun advocate, strip people of firearms, all that sort of stuff. He got a home invasion. He was subject to a home invasion, and presumably by somebody who, I don't know, didn't have a registered firearm, perhaps. And he was shot dead and executed in his home. I don't know. Maybe he's learning about, the importance, I put this out on a tweet, of the Second Amendment posthumously. Maybe he'll learn it that way. That is why in the United States you have the right to protect yourself with a firearm, which we don't have in Canada, by the way. And I believe it's time we start to strategically push back legislatively and figure out, a process and a strategy to change the laws in Canada to make them more in line with the United States and the right to protect yourself. I mean, during COVID, we saw all these news stories of, there was a famous one, the guy in the church that was recorded on video, but many occurrences where people had, they encountered one of these random shooters, and luckily there was somebody with a firearm, and in the case of the church event I'm thinking about, somewhere out west, I can't remember which state, Montana maybe, but there was somebody there who was a firearms trainer and was carrying a firearm legally, and he neutralized the threat in the church. So I don't know. There's many examples of which the fake news media wants to ignore, but as we move towards this, progressive utopia where we don't blame anybody for crimes, it's all, the society and the environment that makes them evil, therefore we don't prosecute anybody. By the way, that's what they believe. That's the philosophical framework of postmodernism. People aren't individuals. We're all part of a collective, and it's the society around us that makes people evil. And, there might be a little bit of nuanced truth to that in certain circumstances, but not for everybody. There are certain people that are just complete garbage. That's just, how human beings can be wired sometimes. But anyways, so Josh Kruger was subject to this home invasion. Didn't end well for him. And what was interesting, I put in the thumbnail here, is something that Scott Adams put on his Twitter feed, and he talked about on his live stream. He was mainly referring to Republicans, but the idea was if Joe Biden gets elected, you may be dead in a year. Well, unfortunately, look what's happened. You're getting an administration in the United States case that doesn't care about the enforcement of any form of rule of law in a practical manner. What they're doing is they're carbon copying the exact model that Mao Zedong did in China, where he elevated and empowered all the degenerates of society, all the criminals, all the thugs, all the rapists and murderers, and he prosecuted all the academics, the people contributed, the upper middle class, working class, and that's how he took over China. And by the skin of his teeth, it wasn't a done deal. He just barely managed to put it together. And there's some idiots in Canada who just seem to be following that same model as well as in the United States. So when people like us call them communists, yeah, there's a reason we call them communists. But some people on certain sides of the political spectrum, they just get triggered into cognitive dissonance. They react to stimulus of certain words, and then they just turn off, right? But anyways, Bridget, need to talk with you, BJ. I need some positive solution talk when we get back. Yeah, listen. This is about as negative we're getting today. Right? There's lots of. I talked about it in a space last night, but I'll get to that in a minute. But anyways, I think this is just another nail in the coffin of wokeness when they have one of their activists is subjected to a home invasion and is executed, then everybody's standing around twiddling their thumbs and saying, "Oh, ooh, okay, well, we didn't plan on this," right? So we'll see how things evolve out of there. Miss Cheryl definitely agree. Bridget, how you go postal on our government positive talk. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. Canada needs law. Canada needs the law. The outcome of a man in Milton is a great precedent, though I'm not sure what that is. Maybe Jesse, if you can give some additional context for that. If the laws are protected, the innocent, and if not, the guilty, like it used to be, we would be far better off. Well, listen, there's always been corruption. That's not something new. What about the knife attack in Toronto? I don't know. Which knife attack? I'll tell you something. I guess it was about a year ago now, last summer, I went into a cell phone store in downtown Toronto, right across from Dundas Square. For context, for people who don't know what Dundas Square is in Toronto, think of it as like Times Square for New York, just smaller, but it's the same idea. It's like the central area of downtown Toronto, where there's a big there's a amphitheater sort of thing, or a mini amphitheater, and a stage and all that sort of stuff, and a lot of events are held there. And there's a bunch of billboards and stuff like that. And I went to the store, which is right across the street, and I went to go in to get something for my cell phone or whatever it was. I can't remember what I had to do, something with my bill. And so I went to go in, and this store, I've been going there, I went there first time maybe 10 years ago, and I hadn't been there in many, many years. But I went to open up the door, and the door was locked. But I saw people inside. I don't know what's going on. So finally, I hear, after pulling a couple of times and just looking out of confusion, I hear a buzz, and that was to let me in to the store. So they had to actually buzz me in. And I said to the guy who was there when I walked in, who's the manager, like not hostily, just out of confusion, I'm like, "Is everything okay?" And he said, "Yeah, why?" I said, "The door was locked." He said, "Yeah, we have to buzz you in." I'm like, "Since when?" Like, I used to come here all the time. I said to him, actually, my business used to be one block over for many, many years. Like, why would you do that? He says, he said, "Used to be. Your business isn't there anymore?" I said, "No, I sold it and whatever." And he said, "How long ago was that?" And I told him, I don't know, many years ago. He says, "Yeah, a lot has changed. And I said, "Okay." He said, "Do you notice there's a lot of homeless people on the street here, lying down?" I said, "Lying down on the streets." I'm like, "Yeah, a little bit more than usual. Not quite San Francisco, but getting there." And he said, "Yeah, we've been robbed at gunpoint 3 times last month." Oh. Well, thank you, John Tory. Thank you, John Tory, for doing that, for bending over for the communists so they could destroy the city. But that's exactly what's going on, which is why don't buy into the left versus right paradigm frame. That is all scripted. They all suck. And in the case of Toronto, the two of them, the incompetence of both sides has destroyed the city. But anyways, apparently knife attacks are becoming quite common in Canada, or in Toronto, should I say. All right. Something that I've discussed a lot with people here, people have been asking me and discussed a lot in the United Kingdom, is, what we've been referring to as either political convoy or Big Con Canada Inc. And I'm always trying to find a good framing, good messaging to get people to understand what it is. And it's going to change because kind of the circumstances change. That's why it's going to evolve, like all things do. But, somebody was asking me just in simple terms, what is this Big Con Canada political convoy apparatus that's linked to the political establishment? And I said, it's pretty simple. It's a protection racket. Right? Bridget, you're here. Is that not a good way to describe it? It's a protection racket for the scripted political establishment, right? And they're all playing off each other because, they're two sides of the same coin sort of thing. And, this is why they get involved and sabotage grassroots movements, sabotage initiatives, They'll set up fake convoys. They'll set up fake, I don't know, that I call it the Million Man Fed March, because that was completely scripted by the political establishment. And I got to tell you, talking to people on the ground here in Florida, much like in the United Kingdom, wow, the playbook is the exact same thing. And there seems to be a lot of crossover between jurisdictions and people who live in one jurisdiction but help with messaging and narratives in other jurisdictions. And they're all part of this little network. It's really quite disturbing. And it's not, left versus right. It's control versus the rest of us. It's quite crazy. But anyways, and what they do is, they'll run narratives that sometimes, it's kind of like Duracell versus Energizer, same company, but two different brands. That's a good way to look at politics in many jurisdictions, Canada, the US, the United Kingdom, and in certain scenarios in Latin America as well, and other Western nations, which is what I'm going to help expose over the long term. And thank God for the Freedom Convoy, because that really, we all kind of knew this was happening. Those of us who've been involved in politics in some way, shape, or form. But it's really the Freedom Convoy that shined the light on it. It's not the convoy itself. It was the co-opting and sabotaging of the Freedom Convoy that became all right, now we got them in our sights. We saw exactly what they did in Ottawa, and now that's given us a lot of information and allowed many of us to link the networks of people and how it all operates, which is what a number of us have been working on ever since the Freedom Convoy, to expose all of it, to pull the curtain, to do exactly what Donald Trump did, whether you like him or not. What did he do? He pulled the curtain so you could see what is happening behind the scenes, the network of how this all operates. And the Freedom Convoy was another example of just that. Bridget says, your interview was hilarious. Which interview? Was that the trigonometry interview? The new convoy. Bridget says, the new convoy had people spray painted in the face. Well, of course, because what the political establishment needs to do is they need to capture these suckers who just have way too much time on their hands and use them as a political pawn to destroy the legacy of what was the most peaceful protest in Canadian history. Is that a fair way to put it? Our largest peaceful protest in Canadian history. They need to destroy this legacy. So if you think any political party is on your side here, despite what they may say and little dribs and drabs, they were not on your side at all. They were on their side. And the Freedom Convoy was all of us coming together. So, Bridget says, back to driving. All right, well, you can listen while you drive, Bridget, And also, Bridget, remember, this is in audio form. You can download the podcast and just type in Honking For Freedom on any podcast app, and you can listen to it there, which is where I'm recording right now. And it'll be up probably 5 minutes after I'm done this. I think I got this down to a system. I hope. Jesse, you tell me if I'm doing a good job or not, right? Remember, the Bible tells us 365 times not to fear. I think that's any wise philosophy, is to not live in fear and to understand the value of strength and challenging and pushing through things, right? So, anyways. So what they'll do is, back to the political establishment, they're going to sabotage grassroots movements. They're going to use proxy organizations or fake, parallel protests to destroy any sort of advancement that a real grassroots movement will take. And then what they're going to do is they're going to suck all of you for your money, and they're going to do what's called rage farming. You see a lot of that. You see these organizations saying, Justin Trudeau or the government is taking away your freedoms. We're gonna take them to court on a constitutional challenge. Constitutional challenges, by the way, always fail, which is why they rage farm around it, because people don't know that. So they suck you for your donations, and then what they hope to do is to lose. Because when they lose, it's, oh my God, look how your freedoms are being eviscerated, and the corruption in the courts, and you can't trust the judges and all that sort of stuff. The only thing you need to do to get your freedoms back is to give us more money, right? Is that not exactly what you've seen around the Freedom Convoy? Oh, the solution is always to give them more money to fund more of their failures, which is exactly why I stepped away from that clown world, because they're leftists in the conservative movement. They're the exact same people. They're no different than any other lefty. They just put on the label of, oh, I'm a conservative. You're not a conservative. There's nothing conservative about you as well at all. You're a rage farmer, right? You're exploitive for donations, the same way that BLM does. It's the same grift all over the place, which is why, just like on the left, they accuse everybody else of what they themselves are guilty of. That's why they call everybody a grifter. Everybody's a grifter except for the people who are rage farming your donations and exploiting your goodwill and telling you, oh, your freedoms are dying, but just give us more money and you'll be okay. What just happened on here? Something just happened on locals. Guillaume is typing something. All right, that's weird. Anyways, so don't buy into this nonsense, and I am going to do my very best to get people up to date with how all of this works behind the scenes, but it's complicated. That's why it's lots of pieces, little bits, and over time, everybody will be able to put it together. That's also why I encourage people to subscribe to my Substack and take a look at it, because I'm gonna release stuff there as well over time that will help everybody get a picture of how all of this works, right? Cheryl says, interesting. Yes, it's interesting and a little bit disheartening, and it's really funny. Somebody in Florida just said to me on the phone when I was coming back from getting my coffee. A good friend of mine is really plugged into politics in the United States, and he took the example of Israel, and he said that's why the Israel system, or countries like it, in Europe it's the same way, right? You have so many different parties. That's why it's better, because right now, the rage farmers and grifters and activists and all sorts of different realms, they use the political parties as a veil, whether it's conservatives or liberals or Democrats or Republicans. They slide under the whole collective umbrella of what they are. Where in the other system, when you have smaller parties, lots of them, you have the pirate party, whatever, those people who use the large parties as a veil for them, they can't do that in the other system. Very interesting. I'm going to explore it more. I'm having a meeting about it later on with some people to get some insight from their perspectives, but quite bright people. Somebody says, except Jim K, who's too busy. Well, Jim, that's not fair. Somebody says, except Jim K, who is too busy to accept money. Yeah, I'll call him and I'll let him know. I do know he's not sleeping a lot because one of the things he's done is he's representing some of the other people who got sold out by the JCCF, and he is quite busy. So I will reach out to him again, Guillaume, and find out what's going on. I haven't spoken to him in a couple of weeks since I spoke to him quickly between the UK and Florida when I was in Toronto for a few days. But I'll reach out and still I appreciate all your love and support. I promise you there's going to be more coming in the future. I'm doing what I can, right? But anyways. All right, and yeah, that's for people who want to help support myself and Bridget and Chris and everybody else in the class action suit, like as our group, which are completely separate from Freedom Corp, because we don't want anything to do with the political corruption. So we have our own counsel. Jim is counsel. So if you want to donate to the legal action, you can to Jim directly, and I'll get it sorted out for you. Guillaume. But anyways, I don't like doing that. I don't like asking for money. I haven't asked for money this entire time. And I think we have a lot of stuff sorted right now, but it is what it is. Okay, so last night, let's talk about a little bit about positivity, and let's get there through a few steps. First, last night, I was in a space hosted by Canadian comedian and journalist. So he wears a couple of hats, like I do, like a bunch of us nowadays wear multiple hats. Daniel Boardman, who writes for the National Telegraph. He is, how should we describe this? He hosted this room because he's all over Indian media. He was one of the first people to kind of really lay out the Khalistani terrorism problem in Canada. More of Trudeau's friends, by the way. It's just the way it is. Right? I said in an earlier stream that if Pablo Escobar was living in Canada, he would be, running. He would be nominated as a candidate for the Liberal Party at this point. Like that's how disgusting our politics has become at this point. You have those types of people, and so in the space that Daniel Boardman was hosting, he was hosting it. Daniel and Greg from Diverge Media were hosting it together to talk about the Indian issue, the Trudeau issue, and predominantly the podcast issue, which is taking a little out of context. I'm no supporter of Trudeau, but we have to be honest when we explain what's going on. And I am a podcaster, so you can imagine I personally have a vested interest in protecting the internet and free speech and all that sort of stuff. So there is cause for concern, there's no question. But at least from what I understand, the way the bill is drafted right now, it's to target platforms like, Podbean or Stitcher. I don't know if Stitcher is around, SoundCloud, whatever, that they have to abide by CRTC regulations for Canadian content within Canada. I have no idea how they would even do that. And they clearly don't understand the internet works. Our geniuses in the Liberal government who've banned all those AR-15s, including the domain ar15.com. So stupid. Just copy and paste. Just so lazy. But anyways, this particular room, somebody came into the room who was the spokesperson for the CPC, Sarah something. What's her last name? I don't know. Sarah something. And so she came in and was answering questions, or what I like to say, spying, is exactly what she was doing there. But there was a back and forth and talking about politics in general, and it was pretty positive. A bunch of people were DMing me saying, why don't you go after about the Freedom Convoy and all that sort of stuff. And you know what? There's a time and a place for everything, right? That wasn't really the time and the place. And Zamir did a great job of actually pushing back against the Conservatives. I think what his question was something along the lines of, leading up to the nomination or Pierre's nomination. I can't remember exactly. I was doing three other things at the same time. But basically what he's inferring is the Conservatives were pro-carbon tax as well as the Liberals, and then they changed their mind to be against the carbon tax, but apparently means they're going to reduce the carbon tax. Reduce doesn't mean eliminate. So clearly there's some funny business going on behind the scenes, and he brought that up. She did what everybody in the political class does and says, oh, well, that's not true. Well, okay, so once again, we want to devolve everything into a he said, she said argument instead of addressing the claim. But whatever, it was fine. The room overall was great, and I think Daniel recorded it. It's a couple of hours long. But what I was struck by was talking to people towards the end of it, maybe the last 45 minutes or so, was the amount of anxiety people are feeling. I was really struck by that. And, one of the guys, we had a back and forth for the last 10 minutes of the space. And I understand people are very anxious. They see all of this fear porn in legacy media and alternative media that ramps it up. Sensational articles are what sells, right? That's what gets your attention, which is why most of them are fake, right? Like with this example with the, Trudeau is censoring podcasts. Well, it's a little bit more complex than that. But, given all the other things that he's done, I can understand the concern and I agree with it. but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And believe me, I'm very much against any of this. I don't like any sort of government regulation. I want as much deregulation and freedom as possible. It's me personally. But I think a lot of it is causing a lot of anxiety from people who kind of buy into these things, buy into the framing of how bad it is. And I got to tell you, what I explained to him is, from my perspective, things are improving dramatically. And by that I mean regular people are now becoming aware of what's going on. And regular people who are not politically active or politically motivated, part of a party, they don't understand maybe a lot of the nuance and complexity that a lot of you do of what's been going on politically in the country. But they don't care. They just want an end to it. They want an end to clown world. And I think that's what we've been looking for some time, is to try to get into the heads of regular people and to say to them, there's something wrong, and the clown world drift that we're on right now towards authoritarianism, communism, or socialism, whatever you want to, depending on which way we go or how far we go. The regular people are just having none of it, and they're getting tired of it as well. I think that's a cause for optimism, really. Like, the politics is going to follow what the culture does, right? And what we've needed to do over this time, and this is why the Freedom Convoy was so important and why I just ignored legacy media, because there's way more people now engaged in alternative media. It's the people who are passively engaged and not thinking. They're the ones who watch legacy media. But people who are aware or want to become aware are engaged in alternative media, which is why I targeted that audience with our messaging strategy. And legacy media is just going to lie about us anyways. And any sort of audio clips or video clips that they would get of us, they would use that as an opportunity just to smear us. So there was no point in engaging. There was way too much downside. It would have been the worst negative asymmetric trade in political history to chase after legacy media, which is what all these subverters and saboteurs wanted us to do. And I kept saying no and saying, you can leave my hotel room now, we're not doing that, sort of thing. And in a couple of cases, they kind of went around my back, and I kept every day trying to stop them. And once or twice, I was unable to do so. What are you going to do? But those are all unauthorized press conferences. And like whenever you saw, like when Tamara was reading the script and whatever, that wasn't an authorized press conference. That was some people who tricked her into going to the room, at least so what she said. And she didn't want to do it, but she did it anyways. At least that's what she told me, right? So who knows? But anyways, so the point of all of this is, my framing has always been, forget the politicians, because they're controlled by the lobby class. What we need to do is communicate with our friends and families, our social circles, people around us, and not in a way that's hostile, but in a way that we can be persuasive. And listen, it's a learned skill to learn how to persuade people, but why not practice with your friends and family who are the least likely to listen to you? We all know our direct family, they never listen to us, right? No, it doesn't matter your family, your parents, your kids, your aunts, your uncles. You tell them something, they're just not going to listen to you because they're friends and family. So that's a great framing, that's a great environment to be in to practice this art of persuasion and asking questions and getting them to think and getting them to slip into cognitive dissonance. When they slip into cognitive dissonance, that's a good sign, and then you just back off. Just leave it there, leave that in the back of their head for a period of time, and then eventually you'll be able to come back to that issue in the future. But we should be practicing within our communities, trying to persuade people over time, and especially people who are maybe, on the opposite side, like our activists, you're never going to get them. But people are somewhere in the middle, you're kind of swing voters sort of thing. A lot of them who, have this worldview that we know is completely false. I don't know, Trump is a racist, COVID had a 50% death rate, like all this sort of stuff. It's not their fault. They've just been subjected to narrative poisoning from fake news, and they haven't heard I would say the opposition, but kind of the facts or the reality around what they're being taught, right? So just be sympathetic to them or empathetic and work on them over time. Hone in your skills of persuasion and communication and reaching people. Because if we can reach our families and our friends and our communities over time, which is the most difficult, that's how we'll fix things. And then the political class and the lobby class will have no choice but to chase the culture as the culture shifts. And the cultural shift comes from with us. Ken says, can you speculate on how the political class rationalize their lying? Well, there are many different ways to rationalize that. I spoke about this in the last stream. So I took the example of Wilson, who whenever there's a debate, he came into a space or he lied, directly during his POEC testimony, just complete fabricated nonsense. But why do you do that? Why do politicians do that? Why does the political class do that? Because when their back is against the wall and people are being persuaded towards the other side, what do? You just make up some fabricated nonsense that's completely false, but that then confuses the people who may not know all the details, and it devolves every conversation or every debate into a he said, she said argument, and then the recipients can't come to any conclusion. So if the viewers are being persuaded to the opposite side from what you want, then just infuse bullshit, and now you may not win the argument, but it's going to be, people are going to walk away confused, and you can consider that a wash. That's why they do that. That's why they fabricate complete nonsense, right? And you'll see that all the way from Trudeau down. You see that in American politics here as well. It's a very common strategy. That's why. I heard that someone say that listening to the fake media is like a python squeezing your head. Yeah, I mean, that might be a good way to describe it. I think, it's very important for me to always, I try to subject myself to different worldviews from mine. Most of I've told people this in the Conservative Party, and they're so in, it's a cult. So they're so in a culty echo chamber. I've told them many times that many of my, eventually stopped doing it because they just didn't have the intellectual capacity to understand this, which is not uncommon amongst political people because they're not really bright at all. I would say that most of my influences in life, they're mostly lefty, and not just within politics, right? Cars, astronomy, cosmology, all those people, many of the people who I admire have a lefty political framework, kind of collectivist, and I'm not afraid of that because I disagree. And it makes me understand their worldview, and I can poke holes in their worldview. And also sometimes when they bring up a good point, it makes you sit back and reevaluate your framing of the world. Have you got it right? Are you making mistakes and whatever? That's a healthy mental exercise for all of us. And this is what I love about Stephen Hicks and people within that crew, sort of Atlas Society type people, because they're neither conservative nor liberal. They're very libertarian. And that gives you a whole other different worldview and perspective, and allows you to kind of sit back and evaluate things, and in my mind, be better informed. And you become a much better advocate for your worldview and world perspective when you understand the other side's argument. That doesn't mean you agree with it. Understanding doesn't mean you agree, right? Cheryl says, not sure yet. Okay, Miss Cheryl Bland, when are you heading back to Florida? Oh, Cheryl, you're in Florida? Where in Florida are you? Not sure. I lost my rental because they decided they didn't want my dogs. Yeah, it's a common thing here in a lot of these places. It was bullshit. It was BS. I can only have Georgia Rosa, hopefully. Okay, well, Cheryl, I hope you find a place with dogs. Which part of the Florida are you going to? You're going to the West Coast or the East Coast? Because there are a lot of dog-friendly communities here, and it shouldn't be a problem here. Where I'm at right now, there's dogs everywhere, but little dogs, right? You can't have a dog over, I think it's 35 or 45 pounds, something like that. That's their weight requirement. So just get a big dog and put it on a diet. All right. So just to conclude, in the space yesterday, I detected a lot of anxiety amongst people, and I'm sure a lot of you are, have that same sort of anxiety and concern. I think it's because people, anxiety comes from when you're living in the future sort of thing, and you're trying to see where things are going. I don't know. I see things are really positive right now, even on the political side. Like, look, you have Bukele in El Salvador, okay? And you have Milei in Argentina, who's more than likely to be elected. I think it's his to lose at this point. Somebody just, what is that? Somebody just subscribed to me. Okay, cool. Awesome. So you have Milei in Argentina, who is very, libertarian, center-right, sort of conservative-ish, or conservative in a lot of ways. But he's really dynamic, and I like that. You have Sweden that elected a new government. That's a right-wing government as well, if I'm not mistaken. So you have all these little things popping up here and there. I think Trump is just a shoo-in for 2024 at this time. The more they bring forward these political indictments, the vast majority of people understand that, okay, these are just political hits. And I think it's his to lose at this point. I don't think he's going to. And, there's jurisdictions around the world that are doing that. And why? Because we're all talking to each other. And what I encourage people, what I've mentioned here before, is to talk to people who disagree with you politically. That's why it was such a pleasure for me to go on trigonometry, because there's a lot we agree on. There's no question there's a lot we agree on. But there's a lot of policies, if we got into the nuance, me and Francis were talking a little bit about that behind the scenes. Yeah, there's going to be policies we disagree with, but we're all pro-freedom. We're all we should be able to have as much freedom to live our lives as possible. And the more people we find like that on more the liberal side of politics, the better we're all going to be. And that Pandora's box has been opened, and you're not going to be able to push it back. And more liberal-minded people, whether you agree or disagree with them on certain policies, are now aware of this fact, and they're getting over, a lot of them are getting over the allergy of conservative media or conservative-minded people. And I think people like, Russell Brand is a good example of somebody who's left, but advocates for both sides of debates. Scott Adams is a good sign of that too. There's a lot of people. Unfortunately, there's people like Sam Harris who are just trapped in the echo chamber, whatever. But there's a lot of voices that are coming out that are explaining that we need to talk to people across all sides, and I'm going to try to do the same thing. And that's what's putting an end to this. And that's why I'm so positive about things in the future. I think, like I said last night, I think we've hit peak stupidity, peak clown world. It's not going to get any worse at this point. It's going to be like this for a little while. You're going to see individual cases. You're going to see individual scenarios and headlines that'll make you say, what the hell is going on? Because that's the role of media, is to affect you emotionally and show you something that's out of the norm and shocking. That's going to continue. But overall, you take the 50,000-foot view of society, where we're going and what's happening, I don't know. All I see is things are going in the right direction. It's just a slow grind. And like I said last night, it took us when does all this postmodern nonsense really take off? From my worldview, and I could be wrong, this is just my opinion, you see it a lot in the 1960s. It started in the arts and went through all parts of society to the point where it was in education, and now it's in politics. Well, it's going to take us maybe not quite so long to have the pendulum swing and reset society, but it's going to take a generation. It's going to be a generation of this nonsense, trying to push things back. But if you look back and you figure, okay, I'm engaged in political discourse, that's going to take a generation to change. Okay, then it's not so scary. Yeah, of course there's going to be nonsense. There's going to be legislation, things that will have to be repealed and will be at some point. But that's not something to suffer anxiety about. I would suffer anxiety if I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Then you could be anxious. But I see a big light at the end of the tunnel, which has been forming since the trucker convoy, because I think that really sent a message to the political class that there's a line in the sand that you'll never cross again. And they'll come up to the line, they'll engage in more behavioral nudge theory, but I don't think they're going to be as bolden as they were in the past, right? So, anyways. Jesse, poor Russell. Yeah, Russell will be fine. I think he'll be okay. All right, last thing I want to talk about today is Brokenomics. So when I was in England, I gotta stop calling it the UK because my friends there are English. When I was in England, I did. You might have seen the segment where I guest co-hosted on Lotus Eaters, which was a lot of fun. But we also did, before I went to London to do trigonometry, I did a very long interview with Dan Taub, who is a former venture capitalist, finance guy, a brilliant guy. Really have a lot of time for him. Just a top dude. He hosts a show on Lotus Eaters called Brokenomics, and talks about the economic implications of the policies of what we're living in today, and how fiat currency and central banks and monetary policy and government budgets and all that sort of stuff is breaking our economics, right? And he's really good. He's really good at taking. You don't have to be an economics person to be interested in it. He's really good at making it interesting for the layman. So, anyways, he'll branch off and he'll talk about other things that are tangentially related. And he always wanted to do an episode on the Freedom Convoy. So that's why I flew to England. By the way, honkingforfreedom.com. If you haven't read it yet, I promise, please let people know. And Christmas is coming. You want to make people cry during Christmas? I think this is the way to do it. But anyways, we're going to do an hour-long interview on Brokenomics, and it ended up being 3 hours. So it was a really long talk. Part one was all the background of the Freedom Convoy, what went on, how everything happened. And then part two was everything that's happened since, including some comments on the POAC, Public Order Emergency Commission, and some of the characters that some people that we talked a little bit about, and he was quite fascinated by it. And why he was fascinated is because they see all the same tactics by the Uniparty being used in England just like they're being used in Canada. It was fascinating. So they do, I think if you follow the Lotus Eaters podcast, if you subscribe to their podcast, they usually do a preview, which is 20, 25, maybe 30 minutes of the interview. You can get that for free. And then if you want to listen to the entire thing or watch the entire interview, that's going to be on lotuseaters.com. They have a paywall. And I know people don't like them, but I see what Carl's dealing with, trying to build a business. I'm doing the same. It's not easy. And those guys work like crazy, and they really care about this stuff. Money is second. Fixing the culture and fixing their country is first. So I got a lot of time for all of them. They really do care about it. So Brokenomics is going to be out. He told me today at some point Brokenomics will be available. I will post the link somewhere. I'll throw it in Locals and throw it in Twitter. And then yesterday did another Lotus Eaters from here remotely. Stelios who's a former, until recently, he's a philosophy professor. Really a brilliant guy. I really like Stelios. He's quite brilliant in his analysis of the cultural changes of what's happening right now. And so he hosts a program on Lotus Eaters called the Symposium. It's called the Symposium. It's on philosophy, and they discuss different world philosophies as it pertains to what's going on in the world today, and they pair it to current events and stuff. So Dan and Stelios and I did a symposium yesterday on seduction and dating and relationships and all that sort of stuff, because they've identified this issue. It's a concern to them, is this whole incel movement, which I don't think is nearly as bad as it is. I think it's just labeling is a big problem. But we discussed that. We were trying to fix this whole incel issue and help people who are struggling to develop relationships, help them find relationships and different things that they can do. And it was quite fascinating to talk a little bit about the philosophy of human interaction with men and women. And I guess that makes me racist, understanding that we are sexually dimorphic, but we are. And that doesn't mean I don't support people who, want freedom in certain other realms, but that's a whole other debate, a whole other conversation we'll talk about another time. We need gold-backed currency, Cheryl says. I don't know. If you look at the period where fiat currency, the US dollar, was gold-backed until 71, they still inflated money like crazy. In the 1940s, inflation was crazy. So just because it's gold-backed doesn't mean they can't just issue more currency. They can just denominate it differently. There's a bunch of tools that they use in the central bank to do it. And that's why I'm a proponent of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is an absolute fixed supply. It can't be played with it. Now, on the Lightning Network, you can always fractionalize Satoshis if it gets to have smaller denominations as the value increases so people can buy it. And that's all that's for. But it's an absolute fixed supply. I know I didn't explain that well. But the point is, no, you can't inflate Bitcoin like you can a fiat currency or a currency that's backed by gold. Gold did not prevent money printing. So, not that it's not important. It would definitely help. There's no question. I'm not against gold. I'm not against precious metals. Or in my old career, when I was a gemologist and a diamond grader, there's lots of people who store value in diamonds as well. And they're good because they're small, easily transportable and stuff like that. But, you ever get searched with a pink diamond, a carat pink diamond, which doesn't really exist, or very, very seldomly, then you might have some splaining to do. But anyways, point of all of this is I think we've turned a corner. I don't know. I mean, Francis and Constantine, yeah, they're more on kind of the centrist liberal side, but they're very reasonable. But I think what's changed now is maybe their audience, which I would suspect biases in that direction. They're more open to listening to all sides of the argument, which wasn't happening in the past. And that alone will fix our society. It's just going to take time. It's got to be patient. So you might as well enjoy it. Enjoy the show. Laugh at the ridiculousness. Focus on your life and your loved ones and all those things that are important to you. Focus on gratitude, all the things you should be thankful for. We all have things we need to be thankful for. Jessie has to be thankful for all the birds that she has, and Rocky, except Rocky's giving her attitude today. But we all have amazing things in our lives that are way more important than political nonsense. It's just a matter of refocusing on that, I was really touched when Guillaume, who's in here in the chat, when he bought some copies of Honking For Freedom and put it in the local cafe, I think where he lives, or the general neighborhood or whatever. And that's what we need to go back to, especially prior to COVID. The other day when I was sitting on the computer working, and I may do this in a couple of hours, I left the house. I went to a coffee shop to sit on the computer and work. And I'm not the guy who just plugs in and ignores everybody. When you're into the groove, but I'll talk to people in the place. I'll talk to the people who work there and stuff like that. Becoming more open and trying to reach and communicate with more people you don't know just by being kind. You talk about something that will fix society, that will do it. And yeah, there's always people who are going to be grumpy. So, okay, well, that's their problem. It's not your problem, right? There's so many things we can do individually in our lives to make things better, and I think that's part of it. So, hope for a big settlement soon. We'll be putting some in Bitcoin. Good. If it comes, If it comes, so gear up, BJ Dictor. I'll be bugging you. Okay, sure. Well, listen, there's a bunch of us, as you know, Jesse, who will be more than willing to help you with Bitcoin and any of you. I think it's important. It's just a hedge. Think of it as an insurance policy, right? Especially if you're not a Bitcoiner, you're not into all the technology and stuff. just buy it as a, I think Paul Tudor Jones was the first one to suggest, he's a Wall Street trader, very successful one. He suggested 5% of your net worth into Bitcoin. Yeah, okay, that's a good frame. It's an insurance policy, right? Will you need it? I don't know. But as there's more adaptation into the network, it's definitely going to increase in value because, as Greg Foss likes to say, that's just math. That's just the mathematics. And that's because it's a fixed supply. So don't feel intimidated by Bitcoin. You can reach out to me or any of us. I haven't hosted a Bitcoin space in a while. Wednesdays is usually the political Bitcoin hour, but I think we're not going to do it this week because Brandon will be traveling and I will be traveling as well. So I think we're going to have to take the week off, but we'll get back to it next week. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. But don't forget, and you bring this up right now, Jesse, don't forget all the things you have in your life to be grateful for. We all have them. And they can be it could be the smallest thing. It could be going to, I don't know, again, your local coffee shop in the morning and somebody is just super nice to you and kind to you. That could be something, a small thing like that. That can be something you can have gratitude towards, right? And that's how you build positive energy and all that sort of stuff. So anyways, I hope all is well. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy your day. Please be good to one another, and I will talk to you all